Those of you who've probably gone through a CMS survey know this is not something you want to get. And that happens to be that statement of deficiency where you have to do that plan of correction. And no facility wants to get that notice that they've been involuntarily terminated from the CMS agreement. What we're talking about today is it starts in Hospital A. That's where your acute hospitals are located. The regulations, the interpretive guidelines. For critical access hospitals, yours in Appendix W. What we're talking about, there is some overlap, mirrored image of information, not always, but quite a bit is. So for Appendix A, you actually have two sections that you work off of. One happens to be right at the beginning, where it talks about provision of emergency services, but that's for non-participating hospitals. What do you have to do in that situation? Because you may get a Medicare or Medicaid patient in. But the big bulk of what we're talking about in particular happens to be under emergency services. As far as EMTALA, in Appendix A, the regulation is not there. It has its own appendix, Appendix V. However, when we're talking critical access hospitals, you do have emergency services, but you also have the regulation for EMTALA. And I think part of this had to do with back in 2019 and 2020, they made some major revisions to some of these requirements. And what they did was they took the requirements of EMTALA and what had to be there and put it in their own manual. And that's Appendix V. So as you go through, if you're new to your role, you're trying to find out where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to look at? On EMTALA, go to V. For emergency services, go to Appendix A. If you're at acute, if you're a critical access hospital, go to Appendix Z. So I'm going to start off with acute hospitals. You have to have an emergency department, and if you do, it has to comply with this section. If you do not, there are some hospitals that don't. They don't provide emergency services. The board of directors, and just for time's sake, I'm just going to refer to that as the board. They have to make sure the hospital has written policy and procedures should something crop up in your hospital, an emergency. Say, and visitors walking through stops in at your hospital because they're having chest pain. It could be that there's an event on your floor that you have to take care of. We have to provide for those emergency services outside of the ED. Now, if you do this, let's say they walk into your ED. You can have a qualified RN assess that patient. It doesn't have to be a physician. It can be a qualified person. And that's usually in those hospitals that don't have a dedicated emergency department. The medical staff, they have to pull together policy and procedures on how they address these situations and what happens